Okay, so this case study, as we just mentioned, is a 62-year-old female who came to us experiencing whole body pain, weight gain issues, memory concerns, and constant fatigue. So this might look familiar. This is our voice report. And there's some areas of the voice report that are going to be the same across the board. And then there are other aspects of it that are dynamic, which means it changes depending on what your individual results are. If it's based on your individual results and it's dynamic, then it's going to be highlighted in yellow. Everything else is always the same.
Yeah, and so we just walk through the different pillars, and this is just the summary of results, right? So this gives you a snapshot of all the information that we're about to go through and kind of deep dive into and connect different dots. As you can see, another nuance that you might look at on our screen and be like, wait, what? Is number 3 and number 4. Number 3 has pH environment and number 4 has pH environment. We thought that pH environment should always be on there, so that's always number 4. However, there's 10 different systems, which you'll see in a little bit, that can populate in position number 2 or number 3 on the screen, on the second bullet or third bullet. So pH environment coming up twice is very highly significant, is what it tells us. So that's just a preliminary thought, but we go through all these different things. We go through the different pillars. We go through different organs and systems. We also go through the pH environment. And then we also connect different dots to a physical influence, an emotional influence. And then later on, you'll also see dynamic parts of it being chronic or acute. So then on the next page, you have your key. So we have a 0 to 100%. So closer to 100%, that's a great grade. However, we also want to let you know, for those of you that are currently looking at your report, that really what you want to look at is a 50% or higher is a passing grade.
Yeah, so anything that's 50% or higher, not really something that we're concerned about, not something that we need to dive into much further. Anything that's below 50%, we want to give the body support in that area.
But if your lowest score happens to be, 50% out of everything, then
just start there.
Then just start there for sure.
Yeah. So we're measuring both emotional and physical factors, and that's because the body can have physical results and changes based on your emotional state on several different levels.
And that's what we're going to be talking about is the emotional pillar tonight, right? So we've talked about a lot of different, a lot of other pillars. Tonight is all about the emotional pillar.
Yes.
And we put the emotional factors, intellectual, emotional, behavior, spiritual, so that you can deep dive on yourself, so that if an emotional factor comes up, you can ask yourself these questions.
And so, for example, if you find yourself getting stuck in a certain thought pattern over and over again, then that will most likely be intellectually emotional. If you find yourself being very reactive to something and feeling that emotion really deep, that's the emotional. If you find yourself repeating the same behavior or habit over and over and over again, even though you know it's probably not the best thing for you, that would be a behavioral emotional influence. And then spiritual is when we feel like we're fulfilling our purpose or we're connected to something greater than ourselves. It's just a much deeper sense of knowing who we are and
stress,
like that.
And we can't get away from stress, right? That's going to be a main point on the emotional factor, right? I mean, we all know that we're experiencing way more stress today than ever before. Mm-hmm. We used to go through maybe a handful of stressors a day. Now we're doing probably over 100 stressors in a day. And there's a lot of research that shows that chronic stress is linked to actually a smaller hippocampus, right? So that's the memory center of the brain. Right. So that stress can affect your memory or really your behavior, right? Mm-hmm. Or your intellect or your emotions. So these factors and repetitive thought patterns can have a major effect on the physicality of a system like the brain.
And we have some great examples of research for you a little bit later on that we're going to dive into. You'll also notice that on the report, something will either be acute or chronic. It's more common for chronic to come up just because we put more emphasis on what is going on in the body that's ongoing or more of a long-term imbalance. When it's acute, it usually means it's something more recent, and a lot of times there could be inflammation in the area as well, if it's on the physical side. So then this next page is your 5 pillars of health. These pillars represent things that impact multiple areas of the body at once. So we have each of these pillars here: oxygen, hydration, mouth, nutrition, and emotions. And then they each have an associated percentage, whether they're acute or chronic. And then they also say what area of the body, for example, what organ is associated or being affected by that particular pillar of health. So on this example, you'll notice that there's actually 2 pillars that are both at 51%. And remember, 50% or better is great. So this person doesn't have a really low percentage for their pillar, but the one that does come up with the lowest data is the emotions pillar.
Now let's give some context. So let's just say this person, and they're pretty, they're not well, and they're not doing great, and they have 51%. It's because they have a great constitution.
Yes, very good point.
You have to remember, on any testing, right, it's going to take into account all these different layers. And so, you know, because something is acutely happening to this person, or that they're really sick, or they've been sick for a long time, doesn't mean necessarily that, oh man, if I'm really sick, I'm going to have a low score. That's not how this is built to even include that if you have a really good constitution of health and you can take a pretty good, you know, beating, sort of say, you know, then it might not show up here.
You always hear about those guys who smoked a cigarette every day until they were in their 90s and it never seemed to bother them. That's because they have a really strong constitution.
So the reason why emotions was highlighted and not hydration in this case is because emotions happens. There's a mathematical stuff in the back end that essentially emotions won out because it was a little bit more intense or deeper than hydration. And so that's why that's in red, and that's going to be always pointing you in the direction. The red is going to be pointing you in the direction of where you want to go first and start diving into. The other nuance that you'll see in this example is small intestines came up twice. So if you have an organ that comes up twice, and even if it was small intestines and large intestines, because they're both gut related, you would want to start paying attention to that.
And say, oh, maybe there's something about my digestion that could be adjusted. Or maybe I could go back and watch the other example video that we did on the nutrition pillar and figure out how I can adjust my gut.
And then the other thing that I would highly recommend doing is if you see something like here, right? Here's a great example. You have emotions and skeleton. You're like, I don't get it. If you actually look into how an emotional response happens, it's kind of nuts. So when your body goes into fight or flight and moves into the limbic system and moves into that sympathetic that sympathetic versus the parasympathetic. Sympathetic is your fight or flight. Your parasympathetic is your rest, relaxation, healing. So when you're in that fight or flight, which a lot of us are in a lot of ways, if it is long-term, literally what the body does is it actually dumps calcium into the blood. That is, so it has to grab calcium from somewhere. Where is it going to grab it? From the bones.
The skeleton, from the bones.
So that's why that's the connection, you know. So not only are we here to make connections on on these calls, but I would urge you to even look it up, meaning, go to Google and say, okay, how do emotions connect to the skeleton?
And so that's what the breakdown of what happens on the physical side. The other thing you want to think about is if some sort of part of the body comes up, think about what that part of the body does.
Yeah.
Your skeleton supports you. If you don't feel supported, that can have a huge emotional impact, whether it's you not feeling supported by yourself or by someone else. And so that can be one of those emotional responses that leads to the body dumping the calcium into the bloodstream and then impacting the skeletal system.
And you really want to pay attention to, in my opinion, emotion is so important that no matter what the score is, even if it's not your main pillar, I would definitely look and pay attention to what the emotion is being associated with to what organ.
Yeah.
I think it's very important. There's again, here's another little research tidbit because it's just so fascinating. Your emotions can actually affect how well you heal. They actually did a study where they put a pencil eraser, right? So this small of a scar on somebody, right? So they did a burn, like a little a burn on somebody, on multiple people, on hundreds of people, and they put them through an emotional response, and other people they didn't, and they noticed a 40% difference. You were 40% slower to heal a pencil eraser sized burn if you were under emotional stress.
Mm-hmm.
Because your body is trying to prioritize something. It's not saying, hey, I want to heal. It's, I want to run. I want to get out of there.
And the emotional stress example they gave, it wasn't something major like a tiger's chasing me. It was something like an exam, a school exam,
Yeah,
or
these were college students.
Bosses yelling at them.
So that's how intense it can be. And I know that, we've all met people that, have a lot of anxiety around test taking, but that's how simple of an example that we might not think of because we're around it all the time, that when you put your body into that, it can start to have a lot of effects, and not just, let's just say on the emotional pillar, but on all of it, on your small intestines, on your ovaries, on your thyroid, obviously your thyroid. So it really is kind of crazy what can happen when you're under constant stress and you don't know how to deal with it. But as you can see at the bottom of this page, and you'll see different on yours, you'll have steps that you can take immediately. Now, don't dismiss the steps just because they're simple. We wanted them simple so that you would take action immediately and you can realize it. And I'm telling you, there's so much, it's crazy how much research there is out there on this stuff. The self-care routine, right? Activities you enjoy, promote relaxation, self-nurturing, meditation, visualization, right? Gratitude, right? All these things have amazing research qualities behind them that show what it can do for you. So there was a visualization, 2 studies. One, they took a basketball team and they wanted to help them improve their free throws, or they wanted to study free throws and visualization. So they took one group that practiced free throws every day of the week. Then they took another group that sat at home every day and just visualized making the free throw, just making it. Then they had a third group that didn't visualize and didn't do any free throws. The group, right, and this was after I think a week or 2, they brought them back and then they had them do free throws to see how much they improved. And they did this repeatedly. And the group that just visualized increased their free throw percentage by 24%. The group that actually practiced only increased it by 23%. So, when it comes to your emotional state, you should always be paying attention to it, because you don't always want to take action on a physical level, like exercise, eating better, right? But you want to compound that with your emotional state, right? Even if you're having a cheat meal, you shouldn't be like, oh God, you should be like, this is the best meal ever. This is wonderful. This is going to nourish me.
Out of this, I can.
Not because it might change the chemical reactions that happen, but it's going to change how your body absorbs it and releases it. Even if you wanted to visualize, great, I'm going to eat this. It's going to taste wonderful, and it's going to go out of my system. None of this guck or none of the stuff is going to stay in my system, and you can visualize that if you wanted to. But however you want to do it, that visualization is so powerful that even they did another study with maids in a hotel. So they took these maids and they had them change their perception. So they were overweight, they had high blood pressure, their blood sugar was off the roof, so they had diabetes. So they took them and they said, okay, what do you think you're doing? Oh, we're just cleaning. They said, no, you're lifting up furniture, you're doing the vacuum, so you're pulling and pushing all the time. No, you're working out. Because they didn't have time to go and work out at the gym. They were working 2 jobs. This was it. And that was it. But as soon as they changed their perception and visualize it, oh yeah, I am working out. I'm lifting this, I'm cleaning this, I'm doing this, I'm bending down, I'm picking up.
And they had 2 groups. They had one group that they told this to that said, hey, by the way, you're working out when you're doing your normal working around the hotel. And then they had another group that they didn't say that to at all. And they allowed them to go about their normal routine of working.
And it was just kind of crazy, because they, the group that convinced themselves that, yeah, they are working out, their blood pressure lowered. They lowered their diabetes medication. They lost weight. I mean, they didn't do anything different, but their perception of their body. So that's how powerful. So there's, and you can go on PubMed and look at a ton of research on fear and anxiety. There's not a whole lot. It's crazy. There's not a whole lot on like gratitude and like positive. There's a whole bunch more on the negative side. So if you can imagine how when you're negative, what it can do, right? Slow down your healing process, take up resources in your body that should be used for other places, or put your body into a fight or flight where now you're taking calcium away from bones. I mean, all these things can compound. And so when you can reduce your stress, it has an unbelievable effect on the body.
Yeah.
So I even tell, like, there was this one patient that we had, and even this one, I remember talking to her once, and I was like, you need a vacation. Oh, I don't have time for a vacation. I can't do it. I'm taking care of my family. I fly up and down to New York, take care of my family. I'm taking care of my kids. I'm taking care of my husband. I don't have time. I said, well, what do you do the first thing in the morning when you wake up? Oh, well, I have my coffee. Okay, when you're having your coffee, take 5 minutes and have a vacation up here. You don't need to go anywhere. We have these ideas of how to de-stress ourselves, but sometimes we don't have time for that. So but if you can de-stress up here, your body is gonna also be on a vacation to allow it to heal, to allow it to work, to allow it to not get sick.
If your idea of a vacation is going to the beach, mentally put yourself on the beach. Imagine stretching out in that chair, hearing waves, seeing seagulls, whatever it is that's your ideal vacation. You can mentally go there anytime you want. You just have to focus and make the choice to do it.
Yeah.
So then on the next page, we have what's listed the 2 top systems that need the most support. And when you look at the different bars, the blue is physical, the orange is emotional. The one that is the lowest bar, the lowest percentage, that's the one that needs the most support. And that's the one that we're usually referring to over on the right-hand side with more details. So for this example, the first system that needs the most support for this person is their skin, hair, and nails. And yes, that is an entire system, because it has a lot to do with the barrier between us and the outside world. Your skin is the body's largest organ. So the things that are contributing in this person is the nail and skin health. And that speaks a little bit to things like minerals and digestion.
And again, these minerals are being used up to
If
run from this situation that you can't run from because it's life.
Right.
So that's why these can happen.
Yeah.
Right. That's, I mean, even my brother, he was losing his hair at one point, and that's because of the stress. He's a young dude, and I can tell you, I have a full head of hair. And those of you that really know me have seen it really crazy. And my mom has a full head of hair. My dad has a full head of hair. I mean, so there was no reason for him to start losing it. But I mean, stress is a powerful thing that can maneuver your body, and especially within the skin, hair, and nails area.
I was helping a patient with their hair loss, actually, and I was diving into some of the research, and it said that one of the things to look at when you have hair loss is think back 6 months prior. Was there a traumatic stress event? Because usually it takes about 6 months for the hair loss to occur after a traumatic stress event. So that's something else to consider if you suddenly have hair loss. What was your emotional state 6 months ago?
And then the other great thing here is that we also have learning resources where it says click here. They're going to be different for each system. So depending on what you have, you can click on that and it goes to a bunch of resources for that system that will help. Now, one thing that you can immediately do is something called Jinshin. So you can literally hold different fingers and it literally relaxes the entire nervous system. This has been done for a long time.
And instructions for that are going to be in the emotion tools video that you have access to when we get to all the combined resources on the last page.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the other one that came up, the other system that came up was the pH environment. And like Matthew said earlier, we always look at what's influencing the pH environment on the first page during the overview, the summary, because it's so important to keep our environment alkaline. Disease or dis-ease cannot exist in an alkaline state, in an alkaline body. So if our body is becoming acidic, then the environment is more prone to create disease states. So we want to know what is influencing the body's pH. Some of the things we measure, and in this case, for this individual, it was acidosis, which means how acidic is things like the fluid and the lymph system and the, fluid behind the eyes, the joints, all that stuff. So this would be one of those contributors to her whole body pain, as well as heavy metal toxicity. Unfortunately, we come in contact with heavy metals all the time. You can't avoid them. An airplane flies by and that jet fuel emits lead, aluminum, and tons of petrochemicals, which gets rained down into the groundwater. And unfortunately, even food grown in the ground is going to absorb that groundwater. So we have to be more diligent about helping our body to eliminate heavy metals on a regular basis, because metals can actually block the absorption of minerals. So again, those minerals come back into play. And then also the impact of acidic substances. What is an acidic substance? For example, Coca-Cola. So your body's pH, your blood's pH actually needs to stay at about a 7.2, 7.4. A Coca-Cola has the pH of 3.2, which means that when you ingest it, in order to avoid poisoning yourself, your body is going to grab a bunch of minerals, whatever you have available, and it's going to essentially kind of throw it at that Coca-Cola to bring that pH up to a 7.2 so that you don't poison your own blood. What happens if you don't have enough of those free-floating minerals available? Well, then the body starts grabbing it from your bones and organs, because that's the only other place it can find them.
And a great way to kind of see this is if you get acid reflux or stomach stuff, acid reflux is not actually acid. There's actually a yeast buildup in your stomach. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why the acid, you have that experience. So that yeast buildup is going to come from sugar.
Yep.
Lots of sugar. So again, some great things for the pH to rectify it is something like Beeler's broth is great on the physical side.
And that's a recipe. It's like a really thick soup.
Yeah. And so that's a really great, if you ever want to reset, like do that once or twice a year and, make a quart of it and do like a cup a day and go through it. It's really amazing nutrition for the entire body and super alkalinizing for the whole body. Mm-hmm. On the emotional side, this is my recommendation. I would watch What the Bleep Do We Know? Mm-hmm. It's an amazing movie. It's a feature film. I think it used to be on Prime, but it's a great film about literally how the emotions can physically affect the body in its pH environment. It literally changes the structure of the cells. So it's a cool movie that explains kind of all the nuances of the emotional aspects and how it affects the body as a whole.
And another way to counterbalance acidity in the body on a mental and emotional level is to laugh.
Oh, yeah.
Find things that you find funny or enjoyable and watch them and laugh out loud as hard as you can. That laughter creates such a great alkalinity in the body.
And another way would be prayer. Whatever you want to call prayer, right? And sitting into that prayer. There was actually a study that they did back in the day, back in 2016. They got a group of people, a large group of people, to pray over, I think, a 3-year period, on and off for a 3-year period. And they actually reduced the national crime by 21%. Now, you might say, it's baloney, it could be the time. So they actually did the math on it. They said, that's fair. It could have been just the time, and maybe it just somehow magically decreased by some other nuance. They did the math and found that if it wasn't the prayer, it was a 1 in 10 million chance that it was just a random coincidence that they decreased the national homicide rate by 21%.
And as with the other system, here's a learning resource. And for whichever system comes up for you, again, that click here is going to take you to a resource to start addressing these things at home. And then we also want to list the most impactful factor. That means which organ, if we supported it just a little bit more, could it positively benefit multiple systems at once? And that one also comes with a learning resource. So then this next page, this masters of function, these secondary priorities, these are the other 8 systems that we measure that didn't come up as the 2 that need the most support on the previous page.
And it shouldn't shock you, right, to connect the heart, the pH at this point,
Right.
the skin, hair, now all the way back to the emotional factor.
Yes. Yeah.
Not for sure.
So this page, it's not really something that we focus on when we're diving into these reports, but it's great extra information for anybody who just wants to nerd out a little bit. So I know a lot of people will look at this and it'll be an easy way for them to have a quick glance at the 2 different bars and say, okay, do I have more blue ones that are low or more orange ones that are low? If it's more orange ones, I need to explore my emotional tools a little bit further. If it's on the physical side, then the physical tweaking is probably where my focus is.
And we
right
recommend
now.
doing this report probably once a month so that you can go through different systems that need to support and just keep up to date with the changes that you're constantly going through.
Because the body goes through natural healing cycles every 3 days, 7 days, 21 days, and 90 days. Yeah. And then this last page,
Is if you really
want to nerd out,
yeah.
this is all of the percentages for each one of these organs that we're measuring.
And this is a single percentage because this is combining the average between the physical and the emotional percentage. So this is a total wellness score for that organ. And then the next thing you'll see below that, or to the left of it, is chronic or acute, which we've explained. And then you'll notice that it could say emotional, physical and emotional, or it could say significant or strong. If it says significant or strong, you want to pay attention to those organs and immediately support them. So in this case, obviously the heart already came up as an impactful organ, but it came up obviously as a significant physical factor. So you're going to want to, for example, right, Hawthorne is great for the heart. So you're going to want to feed the heart on multiple levels, even though it's saying physical. Yes, take the physical action, right? Movement is another great physical action, a rebounder. But you definitely want to take both actions, but we want to give you a hint of like where to kind of go with it. So this is to geek out on another level once you've gone through the pillar. So the pillar is the most significant thing because that's the overarching thing. So you want to change that first. You want to focus on that first. If you feel like you got it, then great. Move to the 2 highest priority systems that were on that next page.
And the most impactful factor. And then just look at the last page to check whichever most impactful factor came up. Was it physical, emotional, or both?
Yeah. So then this last one is, just have fun with it. And here we have a full list of resources. So even if you end up only doing this report once, great. Keep this report with you because these the link for these resources will never change.
And we will always continue to add new resources
Always.
as we come across them because we want you guys to have access to as many tools as possible.
So this is kind of a breakdown and different things that we did with this patient and explained with this patient to kind of move the needle immediately.
So there we go. So now we're just going to stop the recording. Thank you guys.